Jill, what's the story behind this disturbing rise in, well, homeless families on the street in San Francisco?
You know, I asked that same question this week when they came out with numbers at a press conference at City Hall. You know, where is this coming from? Isn't the economy getting a little better? Shouldn't we be seeing relief? And they said, we aren't exactly sure, but what we do know is we have more families than ever on the waiting list for shelter. Last week they had 267 families on the wait list for 59 city-funded rooms. It's also reflected in the schools, where there are 2,200 children who are classified as homeless. That's up 400 from the year before. So we're seeing a very disturbing trend in San Francisco that's in the schools, it's on the streets. These are families that are not necessarily sleeping in parks or out in the open, but they are in cars, they're in shelters, they are doubled up in apartments, or they're in single resident occupancy hotels, which by definition should be for one person, and are also housing large families. So it is a troubling trend across the city that has homeless advocates scratching their heads and trying to figure out what to do with all these families.
What's the impact on these kids? I mean, you went out this week and talked to some of them. I mean, how does this impact how they can do their schoolwork, just function, grow up? I mean, it seems heartbreaking.
It is absolutely heartbreaking. And in fact, after these numbers came out and we reported the press conference at City Hall, we hung out with a homeless family. We're going to have a detailed, in-depth story Sunday about this. It's gut-wrenching what these families go through and what these children go through. I mean, they're hungry, they're cold, they're tired, and then they're supposed to go to school and read, write, do double-digit multiplication like all the other kids, and then in the spring take the standardized tests that all the other kids who are in Hillsborough or Atherton. Yeah, that's Rudy. Rudy's in our package on Sunday, and we'll tell you his story.
Mm-hmm. These homeless faces, they run the gamut of the entire group of people that represent the Bay Area. This isn't just one group of people anymore, is it?
No, there is a wide range. Of course, Hispanic and African American folks are among those with larger numbers, larger percentages in poverty. So you do see a lot of those faces on the street. But you know, they run the gamut, and the reasons that they're on the street also run the gamut. It's everything from the old-fashioned alcoholism and mental illness to unemployment. I mean, these are families who've been living on the margin for, since the recession hit in 2008, and maybe they've just been hanging in with their apartment, and then all of a sudden they lose a few hours on their job, and these are low-paying jobs, maybe minimum wage in San Francisco, which is about $10 an hour, and all of a sudden that's the difference for them not being able to afford rent, and they get evicted and they have nowhere else to go.
Is the city responding?
Right.
Or I saw the demonstration on the steps of City Hall. What were they specifically asking?
They wanted to meet with Mayor Lee, and they wanted to have a sit down with them to talk about options, maybe opening up some of the vacant public housing units, offering a little more rent subsidies or the bridge loans for rent when these families are having difficulty making payments, because if you can keep them in their house, obviously that's better. The mayor wasn't there. His staff member offered to talk to them, but they had said that they've been banging their head against the wall. They want to talk to the mayor. They went away and said, we'll be back because this problem is not going away. These families are not going away. And it is gut-wrenching when you talk to them and you look at how much they want to work, how much they want to feed their kids, how much they want to be somewhere other than the streets or cars or couches, and there's nowhere for them to go. It's tough.
Do you think this could even be less than are actually out there? Because you talked about families doubling up, people living with friends. When you're out there talking to the Homeless Coalition, do they think that this problem could even be bigger, or that there are a lot of people just hanging on, as you said, that could be in this situation soon?
They said that they don't have an accurate count, that their last homeless count found 95 homeless families. And we know there's 2,200 kids that are classified homeless in the schools. So the numbers are way off. It's difficult to count how many there are because you have to self-identify in the schools. You have to identify, living in a shelter and these other types of situations in order to be classified as homeless. They can't go find them You know, they can't knock on doors and see if there's, you know, 4 families living in a studio apartment. So it's tough to count them. They estimate that there are 5,000 members of families who are homeless in San Francisco right now.
Wow.
The school, well, finally, the school district is responding.
The school district has and continues to respond. They have to dip into their general funds to help pay for services, but they do give homeless kids free muni passes. They give them counseling. They give them tutoring. They give them backpacks. You know, they give them uniforms. So they are doing everything they can, because homeless kids have such problems that if they don't address those needs, these kids can't learn.
Well, at least the schools are responding, and the city is now made aware. There's another story where we took a long time to get a response, and that was over some problems, Tom Vacar, that you reported on here with inspections of the new Bay Bridge going up.
This has been going on for years. This is the latest example of a problem, and what you have is an incredibly complex, one-kind-in-the-world structure called the New Eastern Span of the Bay Bridge. And because it's built on earthquake ground, and because it's built very specifically, there's nothing else like it. So you have to do everything kind of as you go. Well, part of making sure that it will survive an earthquake, because its job is to not only survive an earthquake, but to be in service after an earthquake, you have to make sure that everything that you designed is actually put into the bridge in the way that it was designed, in the way that it was contemplated. And on top of that, you usually over-design something like this, since it's going to take such punishment. Well, what we're finding out is that in some cases, at least in one case, a guy who was supposed to be doing some critical inspections, which had been previously inspected by the contractor, but this was to verify. This is to trust, but to verify. Apparently wasn't doing his job very well. He wasn't calibrating the equipment, and he was taking readings that may or may not be accurate. He may not have taken readings at all. There weren't sufficient documents to back this up, and in some cases, after he had left the Bay Bridge project, he was found to have absolutely falsified records in a way that is illegal and may result in some criminal prosecution. So what does all this mean? What it all means is that this structure that was going to initially cost somewhere around $1 billion, which is now $6.3 billion or something like that, has some question marks, which it should not have. Will it likely survive an earthquake? Probably it will. But there's enough of a doubt being raised by not doing certain kinds of inspections on the most critical parts of this thing. This is the very underpinning of the entire bridge, sunk way deep into the bay and holding the road up out of the bay, that Caltrans finds itself in the unenviable position of having to react to stories from a very enterprising reporter up in Sacramento Bee, who looked through some of the stuff and said, there's no proof here that you actually did this, and you can't prove it, and in many cases, Caltrans can't prove it. So Caltrans has some real credibility problems going against it right now.
And did they, I mean, who knew what and when did they know it? I mean, is this something that it should have taken a Bee investigation for them to come out and deal with?
Well, let's put it this way. The things that were known about 3 projects, 2 in Southern California, 1 on a sign here in Oakland, about the foundations of those particular structures, were all attached to the same guy who falsified records. Now, that was some years after he had worked on the Bay Bridge, but he had worked on the Bay Bridge.
Right.
Don't you think somebody from Caltrans would have seriously gone back and taken a look at that, knowing that this is a third rail of government, in the sense that, you know, this thing's cost so much money, it has had such a long history of problems and all that stuff. Well, apparently they didn't do very much on that, and apparently they didn't do so much looking on this guy, other than they found that he was falsifying the records, and then they put him on another project where he was looking at dirts and not at structures. But the point was, instead of firing him, they said, well, we had to go through this elaborate investigation to make sure what's going on. In the meantime, there had been other issues about the inspection and the integrity of the Bay Bridge. And so what we're left with is a bridge that is probably going to survive and operate as designed, but with a big question mark. It's kind of like the Barry Bonds home run ball. It's got an asterisk on it, and that is a problem that should not exist.
Tom, it's interesting, Caltrans' reaction to this, that their initial reaction after the Bee report came out, which was based on, I think, something you said 50 feet of documents, if you were to print it all out. And yet their initial reaction was to go after the journalist a little bit, and to try to besmirch his reputation, that maybe he didn't know what he was talking about. It reminds me a little bit about the 2004 investigation, where documents showed the contractors were hiding worker injuries, and other documents showed they were cutting corners on welds, that they didn't have the quality control that they were saying that they did, and that perhaps in the end taxpayers weren't getting what they paid for, whether the bridge was going to fall down or not. And it's interesting that Caltrans this seems to be their mode when something like this comes up. Instead of saying, okay, let's look at how we do things. What are you seeing with this?
Well, what I've seen over the years is that it is an agency that is unfortunately over-politicized from the top, which means that it gets a lot of pressure from the governor's office, gets a lot of pressure from the legislature, and in fact, oddly enough, it wasn't until the Sacramento Bee ran its article that the Senate called a couple of hearings to say, hey, we better take a look at this. Well, where were you guys before this? So the bottom line is that these guys do get a lot of political pressure from the top. They get a lot on costs because of what it has cost to do this. And as a result, I think they're afraid of being embarrassed. The trouble here is that this foundation testing branch literally tests foundations. And as a result, there's a question mark on this bridge, which may never go away.
Well, the legislature is going to hold hearings now. They've scheduled for the week.
Yeah, they've held a couple of hearings already, and I'm sure that there will be more. They've asked for criminal intervention, both from the Attorney General's office and from the U.S. Attorney's office, and there will be more to be known. But what is really going to have to happen is that there's a seismic committee that is very prestigious, and they have taken on the job of actually doing some inspections, looking at some of the things, doing additional testing that they may be able to do, some of which is buried way beneath the bay at this point in time. But the point is, there is a lot of work going forward. However, there will still be that asterisk on the side of the bridge.
Boy, a big question mark on the mind of many viewers. It's certainly on my mind here. We hope that they'll get this into a position that we can all feel comfortable.
And I think eventually we will.
Right. Well, there's another story that's been around for a number of years, Marisa, that you have tonight, and that's the story about the three-strike sentencing law. There is a move underway now to look at that again.
That's right. This is a law that passed 17 years ago in the aftermath of the terrible abduction and murder of Polly Klaas by a repeat felon. And what that law aimed to do was say, 3 strikes and you're out. If you have a history of violent and serious offenses and you commit a third crime, you're going to prison for life. What's happened in the meantime is that we're seeing a lot of cases where people, yes, maybe had 2 robbery convictions from the 1980s, and then they, shoplifted some gum or a pair of socks and end up with a 25-year-to-life prison sentence. So these backers, who include a group at Stanford who's been doing a lot of litigation trying to appeal some of these harsh sentences, and millionaire David Mills, who's involved with them as well, have come forward with a proposal that would essentially allow people in prison now for life whose third felony was not serious or violent to appeal their sentences, and folks also, going forward, to not be able to get these sentences. The catch here is that we've seen reform efforts in the past. Mm-hmm. This time around, they're saying, yes, if you had rape, murder, child molestation in the past, you can still get thrown in jail for a pair of socks. That's okay. Mm-hmm. What we don't want to see is people, as we face an overcrowding order to get our prison population down by 30,000 people, as the state faces even bigger budget deficits, they're saying we don't want to see people going to jail, languishing behind bars when there's no reason for them to be there.
Marisa, we've been hearing these stories about the guy who stole a pair of socks and then went to jail for 25 years since the law passed. And there have been a lot of people who've tried to reform it, and yet it's always been stopped. Voters don't want it. They kind of like the law the way it is. I'm wondering why now. There seems to be maybe more momentum this time.
Well, I think they're both trying to seize on the political and economic climate, but there's also a sense that this group has really done their homework. They have polled and polled. They have money behind them. They've looked at what voters wanted initially and what they say they want now. And what they've come up with is a very narrow proposal, as opposed to 2006 Prop 66, which would have allowed some of these other folks with really, serious gratuitous offenses in the past at least appeal to the court.
And how many would this affect? I'm sorry about that.
They think that about 3,000 of the 4,000 third strikers in prison for non-serious offenses could actually successfully appeal their
What
sentence.
happens if
Yeah,
they?
at one time, though, they thought they had it, that they
Right.
thought this was going to really become law. And then Governor Schwarzenegger got involved. So is there a chance that there's a politician on the sideline that will come in at the last minute and upset all of this?
You know, they're being a little cagey. They haven't even started collecting signatures for this yet. But when I talked to the folks behind it, I certainly got the sense they think that they will have a coalition that not only includes, you know, high-profile politicians, but actual law enforcement. They think they can get police, maybe even, probably not district attorneys, but a lot of people in law enforcement behind this, because what we're seeing, I think, with realignment, this whole move to bring more prisoners back to the local level, I think there's a sense among your sort of rank and file law enforcement that we're spending too much money incarcerating people that don't need to be there.
But let me ask you this: what happens if we let these people out and they steal another pair of socks? What happens then?
Well, you know, I mean, I think it's important to note that people will still get prosecuted for crimes if they commit them. It's just how seriously and how long are we going to put them in jail. What this doesn't do, which is going to disappoint a lot of people, it doesn't impact second strikers. People who have a second serious or violent felony can still get their sentence doubled. And when I talked to the people who wrote it, they said that's fair. If you commit 2 robberies, you should have a harsher sentence the second time around. And that's what they've seen that voters are willing to support as well. So, you know, I think that there's a tendency in anything that's like sentencing reform. The fear-mongering is really easy to get out there. It's a lot easier to say no to these things. But I think they feel like they've done their homework to the extent that people could potentially back it. And let's not forget, in 2004, they were this close until Arnold Schwarzenegger and a host of other law enforcement folks came out against it with things that, in the meantime, we've realized were really not true statements about what it would have done. I mean, they were saying Charlie Manson could get out. Charlie Manson's not getting out.
Well, and
he wasn't even sentenced under 3 strikes.
I have to think that the saving money might be a good thing to pitch right
Exactly.
now. When are they looking to put this on the ballot?
For this next November, which is it's shaping up to be a
presidential.
very crowded ballot in California. So they're going to have their work cut out for them. They still have to raise the signatures to get it there.
Well, my thanks to all of you for
Thank you.
really some very interesting stories tonight. Glad to have you with us.